Everything goes to your sister. The words sliced through the air like a final verdict, sealing my father's legacy of betrayal. Mr. Harrison's voice was calm, almost indifferent, as he read from the will, but the weight of his words crashed over me like a tidal wave. The mahogany-paneled office, once a place of power and prestige, now felt suffocating, its grandeur mocking my presence. Across from me, Victoria leaned back in her chair, her lips curling into a slow, victorious smile. But beneath the carefully crafted mask of indifference, her eyes gleamed with something sharper, something ruthless. She wasn't just winning, she was savoring it. Sunlight streamed through the window, catching the diamonds on her wrist, the bracelet Dad had given her last year, a glittering symbol of his unwavering favoritism. I clenched my hands in my lap, my nails digging into my palms, but I refused to let my expression waver. At 32, I had long since stopped expecting fairness. But this was the final brutal confirmation of where I stood in my father's world. The properties at 1542 Pine Grove Avenue, 789 Lakeview Drive, and the summer home in Newport, all to Victoria Caldwell, Mr. Harrison continued, adjusting his glasses. The family business, Morgan Communications, including all assets and subsidiaries, to Victoria Caldwell. Victoria leaned back in her chair, practically glowing. She had dressed for the occasion, a sleek black designer dress, perfectly manicured nails, hair styled with precision. She was everything my father valued: ambitious, obedient, married to the right man, mother to the right children. I, on the other hand, had disappointed him at every turn, a marine biologist instead of a corporate successor, divorced the husband he handpicked when I refused to tolerate his affairs, built my own life, my own success, one that didn't fit into my father's narrow definition of achievement. "Is that all?" Victoria asked, her voice dripping with false sympathy. She turned to me with a practiced pout. "Oh, Ellie, I'm so sorry, but you know how Dad felt about your choices." I met her gaze without flinching. "I'm well aware, Vicky." Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. "There is a small personal effects account set aside for Alexandra, containing family photographs and some jewelry from your grandmother." Victoria laughed. "Well, at least you got the family photos. Not sure where you'll put them in that tiny apartment of yours." I stood, smoothing my dress. "Are we finished here, Mr. Harrison?" The lawyer nodded, relieved I wasn't making a scene. He had probably seen enough inheritance battles to know they rarely ended cleanly. But I wasn't going to give Victoria the satisfaction of seeing me broken. "Ellie," she called as I reached the door, "don't worry, I'll make sure you're taken care of. Maybe there's even a position for you at Morgan Communications. Something entry-level, of course." I turned, offering her a small smile. "That's generous, Vicky, but I'll be just fine." The drive home was quiet, the trees lining the road tinged with gold and red. Margaret Whitman had loved this time of year. She would have hated what Dad had done today. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Dinner tonight. We should talk about your future." I ignored it, just as I had been ignoring her hollow gestures since Dad's funeral last week. Instead, I parked in front of my tiny apartment, a charming craftsman house I had bought mortgage-free 3 years ago. Inside, I went straight to my office, unlocked the bottom drawer, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Margaret Whitman had given it to me 2 years ago, just months before her unexpected death. "Don't open this until after your father is gone," she had said, her frail hands gripping mine. "Promise me, Alexandra." I had promised. And now, as I carefully peeled back the flap, I finally understood why. Inside were documents, a lot of them. At the top was a letter in Margaret Whitman's elegant handwriting. My dearest Alexandra, if you're reading this, then your father is gone, and I'm sure he's done exactly what I feared. Your father was a brilliant businessman, but he never understood what truly mattered. He let his pride and his outdated beliefs blinded him to the most valuable thing he had: a daughter with vision, with integrity, with the heart to change the world. What he also never realized was that while he was building Morgan Communications, I was building something of my own. 20 years ago, I began investing in sustainable technology companies. Your research on marine conservation inspired me. While your father dismissed your work as youthful idealism, I saw the future. These holdings have grown considerably, worth far more than Morgan Communications. Everything is in your name, transferred slowly and legally over the years, through a network of investments your father never thought to question. Victoria can't touch a cent of it. Use it wisely, my darling girl. Make the difference I always knew you could. All my love, Margaret Whitman. My hands trembled as I sifted through the documents: stock certificates, investment portfolios, offshore accounts, an empire quietly built under my father's nose. He had never had a clue. The sheer scale of it made my head spin. My phone buzzed. Another text from Victoria. Seriously, Ellie, we need to talk about arrangements. Dad would have wanted us to work together. I picked up my phone, my pulse steady this time, and replied, "You're right. We should talk. Why don't you come over tomorrow morning? I have something to show you." That night, I stayed up late poring over Margaret Whitman's documents, marveling at her brilliance. She had invested in wind farms, solar technology, ocean cleanup initiatives, everything I had dedicated my career to. While Dad had dismissed my work as idealistic nonsense, Margaret Whitman had been quietly securing the future. I thought about Victoria's expression in the lawyer's office, the way she had always sided with Dad, always belittled my choices. Tomorrow, she would finally see the truth. At exactly 10 a.m., the doorbell rang. Victoria stood on my doorstep in another designer outfit, her expression a calculated blend of concern and superiority. Her eyes flicked over my home, barely concealing her disdain. "Oh, Ellie," she said, stepping inside. "We really need to talk about getting you set up properly. This isn't the kind of place a Morgan should be living in." I ignored her and led her to the dining room. "You're right, Vicky. We do need to talk. There's something Margaret Whitman wanted you to see." Her expression hardened slightly at the mention of Margaret Whitman. They had never been close. Victoria was Dad's daughter through and through. "What are you talking about?" she asked. I gestured to the documents laid out on the table. "Take a look." Victoria's manicured fingers hesitated before reaching for the papers. I watched as her smirk slowly faded, replaced by disbelief. Her hands began to shake, her face drained of color, then flushed red with anger. This can't be real," she stammered. "Margaret Whitman was just a housewife. She didn't know anything about business." I almost laughed. Margaret Whitman had spent years playing the role of the quiet, supportive wife, letting Dad and Victoria talk business, while she built something bigger than either of them had ever imagined. "Oh, it's real," I said, my voice steady. "Every document is verified. Margaret Whitman knew exactly what she was doing, and now so do I." Victoria sank into a chair, her perfect posture faltering. But Dad's company. "Morgan Communications is yours," I finished for her, just like Dad wanted. "But Margaret Whitman's legacy, that belongs to me, and it's worth about 10 times what you inherited." Silence stretched between us, broken only by the soft tapping of Victoria's nails against the table. She was recalibrating, strategizing, trying to find her footing in this new reality. Finally, she spoke, slipping into the smooth, persuasive tone she used in boardrooms. We could work together, pool our resources. Think about it, Ellie, with Morgan Communications infrastructure and these assets. No, Vicky, I cut her off. That's not what Margaret Whitman wanted. That's not what Margaret Whitman wanted, and it's not what I want. You got exactly what Dad intended for you. This is my path. Her mask slipped just for a second, revealing something raw beneath. Anger, maybe even fear. But she recovered quickly, standing abruptly, her heels clicking against the floor. "You're making a mistake," she hissed, stepping closer. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, Ellie. This isn't over." I smiled. "Maybe, but at least it's mine to make." Victoria stormed out, her expensive heels striking the pavement with every furious step. I exhaled, feeling lighter than I had in years. Margaret Whitman had been right. Success isn't always loud. Sometimes the quietest players make the biggest moves. I had work to do because this wasn't just about wealth. It was about impact. And now, I had the resources to make it happen. My phone buzzed one last time. Victoria. "This isn't over, Ellie." I glanced at the locked safe in my office, where copies of every document were stored. I thought of my lawyer, already making arrangements to secure Margaret Whitman's legacy. I smiled as I typed my response. "You're right, it's just beginning." The morning after Victoria's world-shattering visit, I woke up to 14 missed calls and a flood of texts from relatives. Word had spread quickly. Victoria had made sure of that. "Alexandra, this is Aunt Judith. How could you do this to your sister? Your father would be devastated. Cousin Brandon here. Let's talk business. I have some great investment opportunities. Hey, cuz, remember when we used to play together as kids? We should catch up." I sighed, muting my phone. Margaret Whitman had always taught me the value of boundaries, and today, I had no time for family drama. There was work to do. My first stop was Harrison and Associates, the law firm that had quietly managed Margaret Whitman's empire for years. Unlike Caldwell, Dad's pompous corporate attorney, Olivia Bennett was sharp, modern, and unshakable. "Right on schedule," Olivia said as I stepped into her office. "Your mother predicted Victoria would try to contest this within days of finding out." I settled into the chair across from her desk. "What's our next move?" Olivia pulled out a thick folder, her lips curving slightly. "Your mother left very specific instructions. She knew Victoria would try to challenge the holdings, likely claiming your mother was mentally unfit when she made these arrangements." I scoffed. "That sounds exactly like Victoria." "Which is why your mother built an airtight case." Olivia's eyes gleamed as she slid a stack of documents toward me. She spent years documenting everything: business meetings, investment decisions, even recordings of conversations with financial advisors. "It's all here. Your mother wasn't just running an empire. She was playing the long game." A slow, admiring smile spread across my face. Margaret Whitman had been 10 steps ahead of everyone. "And there's more," Olivia continued, pulling out another document. "Your mother also left instructions regarding Morgan Communications. She suspected your father's company might try to obstruct some of her environmental initiatives, so she put certain measures in place." As Olivia laid out the details, I felt something settle in my chest. Not just relief, but clarity. Margaret Whitman hadn't just left me wealth, she had left me a strategy. My next stop was the University Laboratory of Doctor, Nathan Kim, one of the leading researchers in ocean pollution prevention. Margaret Whitman's files had revealed that she had been anonymously funding his work for years. The lab was nothing like Morgan Communications. No sleek, glass-walled offices, no marble floors, no expensive art. Just linoleum tiles, cluttered workbenches, and scientific posters. It felt more like home than Dad's world ever had. Dr. Kim's eyes widened as I introduced myself. "Your mother was our anonymous benefactor? We've been trying to thank her for years." "She believed in your work," I said, placing a contract on his desk. "And I want to increase the funding. It's time to take this research to the next level." As we discussed expansion plans, my phone kept buzzing. Victoria, this time via email. "You can't just walk away from family." I didn't bother replying. Family wasn't about blood. It was about who stood by you. Margaret Whitman had known that. And now, so did I. Responsibility. Dad built this legacy for both of us. I stared at the words, thinking about Dad's legacy. Ruthless business tactics, environmental negligence, manipulation. Then I thought about Margaret Whitman's legacy. Sustainable innovation, careful planning, quiet strength. The choice was obvious. That evening, as I pulled into my driveway, I spotted Victoria's Mercedes parked in front of my house. She was sitting on my porch steps, her perfect hair slightly disheveled, her expression unreadable. She stood as I approached. "We need to talk. Really talk, Ellie." I unlocked my door, letting her follow me inside. Unlike yesterday, she didn't comment on my house or my furniture. "I spoke to the board at Morgan Communications today," she began, pacing my living room. "Our stock dropped when news got out about Margaret Whitman's sustainable technology holdings. Investors are nervous." I leaned against the arm of my couch, arms crossed. "Sounds like a you problem." Victoria whirled to face me. "It's an us problem," she snapped. "This is our family's reputation we're talking about. Do you have any idea what people are saying? That Dad was so obsessed with grooming me for leadership that he missed Margaret Whitman building something bigger right under his nose? They're calling him short-sighted, outdated." "They're not wrong." Victoria stopped pacing, her face flushing. "How can you be so cold? This is Dad we're talking about." "Yes. The same Dad who cut me out of his will because I refused to follow his blueprint. The same Dad who mocked my work, dismissed my choices." I met her gaze steadily. "The same Dad who taught you to do the same." Victoria flinched. "I never." But she didn't finish, because we both knew the truth. She had laughed right alongside him when he called my research a waste of time, when he sneered at Margaret Whitman's idealistic nonsense. "Sit down, Vicky," I said softly. "Let me show you something." I opened my laptop and pulled up a presentation I'd been working on. These are projections for the next 10 years. Climate change impact on coastal businesses, environmental regulation trends, sustainable technology market growth. I clicked through the slides, letting the data speak for itself. Dad's business model is dying. Margaret Whitman saw it coming years ago. Victoria leaned in, her business mind whirring. "Morgan Communications could adapt," she said slowly, "with the right partnership." "With my money," I corrected. "With your investment," she countered. "Think about it, Ellie. We could honor both our parents' legacies, merge the company's modernized Dad's approach." "While you remain in control?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "That's not happening, Vicky. I'm done living in your shadow, trying to prove I'm worthy of the Morgan name." Her expression tightened. "Is that what this is about? Revenge?" I shut my laptop. "Number. It's about finally doing things my way. Margaret Whitman gave me that freedom." Victoria didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, almost vulnerable. "I don't know how to do this without you, Ellie. Dad always said we were stronger together." Dad said a lot of things. I held her gaze. But he was wrong about most of them. After she left, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped onto the back porch. The evening air smelled like autumn, crisp, fresh, full of change. I pulled out my phone and opened the email I'd been drafting all day. "Dear Morgan Communications Board of Directors, my name is Eleanor Whitman, and I'm writing to address the recent revelations about my mother's sustainable technology holdings." It was time to make my own moves. Victoria was right about one thing. This was just the beginning. The next morning, another storm arrived in the form of Uncle Franklin. Dad's younger brother, a Morgan Communications Board member, showed up unannounced at my door. "Your father would be turning in his grave," he declared. Skipping a greeting, he launched straight into it. "Letting Morgan Communications stock price take a hit like this." I let him rant, barely listening. He had always been Dad's echo, rolling his eyes at my tree-hugger nonsense at family dinners. "Are you finished?" I asked when he finally paused for breath. "Alexandra, be reasonable," he said, switching tactics. "The family name is exactly what I'm protecting." I folded my arms. "While you and Dad clung to outdated business practices, Margaret Whitman was building something sustainable, something future-proof." His face reddened. "Your mother didn't understand business." "She was just the woman who outmaneuvered all of you," I offered. "The one who built a billion-dollar empire while you weren't paying attention." His mouth pressed into a hard line. "You're making a mistake." "No," I said evenly. "I'm fixing yours." He left in a fury, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I had a feeling future family gatherings were going to be very interesting, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. I had a meeting with a team of environmental scientists struggling to fund their coral reef restoration project. Thanks to Margaret Whitman, I could help. As I drove, I thought about how much had changed in just a few days. Margaret Whitman's gift wasn't just financial freedom. It was the power to make a real difference. My phone buzzed. Another text from Victoria. "Board meeting tomorrow. Last chance to work together on this." I smiled, thinking of the email I'd sent last night. "The plan's already in motion. Good luck with the meeting. I have other commitments." It was time to create my own legacy. The morning of Morgan Communications Board meeting arrived with unexpected news. Their stock had plunged another 15% in pre-market trading. My phone buzzed with a headline from the Wall Street Journal. "Morgan Communications faces investor exodus amid sustainability crisis." I was in my home office reviewing research proposals when Victoria burst in, still in her boardroom attire. Her perfectly tailored suit did nothing to hide the fury in her eyes. "What did you do?" she demanded, slamming a stack of papers onto my desk. "Half our major investors are threatening to pull out." I glanced at the printouts, emails from Morgan Communications' largest institutional investors, concerns over environmental impact, questions about outdated business practices, warnings about market instability. I leaned back in my chair. "Funny how transparency works, isn't it?" Victoria's voice sharpened. "Transparency? You sent environmental impact reports to our investors." "Reports that your research helped compile." "Not mine," I corrected. "Those reports came from independent environmental agencies. I just made sure the right people saw them." Victoria dropped into a chair, her composure fracturing. "The board is in panic mode," she admitted. "They're talking about emergency measures, maybe even selling off divisions just to stay afloat." I nodded. They should be worried. Margaret Whitman's companies are announcing major sustainability initiatives tomorrow. Breakthrough tech that makes Morgan Communications look like a fossil. Victoria exhaled sharply. You're destroying everything Dad built. I met her gaze. No, Vicky. Dad destroyed it himself by refusing to adapt. Margaret Whitman warned him for years about sustainability and modernization. He ignored her. Victoria's fingers tightened into fists. And this is your revenge? This is business. My voice was cold, just like Dad's had always been. Isn't that what he taught us? The market evolves, companies adapt, or they die. Before Victoria could reply, my phone rang. Olivia Bennett. Turn on CNBC, she said. Something's happening. I switched on the TV. Victoria turned as well, her face draining of color as the breaking news ticker scrolled across the screen. Morgan Communications Board calls emergency session. CEO position under review. Victoria's breath hitched. They can't do this. Her voice was barely a whisper. I'm Dad's chosen successor. But they could, and they were. The news anchor was already dissecting the board's decision, how Victoria had failed. To anticipate market shifts, to see how Morgan Communications was hemorrhaging investors, to understand how the company had fallen behind in sustainability. Olivia's voice cut through the moment. The board is receiving another packet of documents, your mother's reports, detailing every mistake Morgan Communications made and exactly how they could have adapted. Victoria turned back to me, realization dawning. You planned this. I shook my head. Wrong again, Vicky. I don't want Dad's company, but I do want the world to see why his way of doing business doesn't work anymore. My phone buzzed again. An email from Dr. Kim. His team had breakthrough results on the ocean cleanup project. You should get back to your meeting, I said, standing. Sounds like they have a lot to discuss. Victoria rose slowly, squaring her shoulders. This isn't over, Alexandra. I gave her an annoying smile. Actually, it is. Margaret Whitman made sure of that. That afternoon, I drove to the university to meet Dr. Kim and his team. The lab was buzzing with excitement. This could revolutionize ocean cleanup efforts, Dr. Kim explained, showing me the data. And with the funding you've provided, we can scale it globally. I thought about Dad, his disdain for environmental efforts, his obsession with short-term profits over long-term impact. Margaret Whitman had seen a different future. Now, I was the one making it a reality. That evening, Olivia called again. The board meeting just ended, she said. Victoria's been removed as CEO. I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of it settle. They're bringing in an interim leader while they reassess the company's direction. I already knew Victoria wouldn't take it well. How's she handling it? I asked. Olivia hesitated. She's threatening legal action, claiming family rights to the position. Let her, I said. The shareholders won't support her, not after today. Olivia sighed. There's more. Some board members are suggesting a merger with your mother's companies. They think it's the only way to save Morgan Communications. I almost laughed. Dad's company, begging for salvation from the very environmental initiatives he had mocked. Not interested. Olivia sounded unsurprised. That's what I thought you'd say. After hanging up, I opened my laptop, reviewing the final details for tomorrow's press conference. Margaret Whitman's legacy was alive, thriving, just as she had planned. My phone buzzed again. Uncle Franklin. His text was brief. The family name, Alexandra. Think about what you're doing to the family name. I thought about Margaret Whitman, quietly building something meaningful while Dad and Victoria chased profits and power. I thought about the years of being dismissed, belittled, Made to feel like I didn't belong, I glanced at Uncle Franklin's text again. The family name, Alexandra. Think about what you're doing to the family name. I exhaled slowly, then typed my response. I'm thinking about the family name. I'm giving it a future. That night, as I went over my speech for tomorrow's press conference, I found an old photo album tucked away in my desk drawer. The first photo, Margaret Whitman at my college graduation, beaming with pride as I accepted my marine biology degree. Dad and Victoria hadn't been there. They had a business meeting. Another picture, Margaret Whitman in her garden, kneeling in the soil, teaching me about ecosystems when I was little. She had always nurtured my curiosity, encouraged my need to protect the environment, even when the rest of the family laughed at it. And now I understood. She had been playing the long game all along, preparing me for this moment. My phone buzzed again. A news alert. Morgan Communication stock hits 5-year low amid leadership crisis. I closed the article and opened my email instead. Dr. Kim's final presentation was waiting for review. Tomorrow we would introduce the world to a different way of doing business, one that valued sustainability over greed, innovation over stagnation. Victoria might still be clinging to Dad's company, but I had something better. Margaret Whitman's vision for the future and the power to make it real. This wasn't just the next chapter of my life. It was the next chapter of the Morgan legacy, and this time, it would be written on my terms. Another text interrupted my thoughts. Victoria! They're destroying everything Dad built. Please, Ellie, help me fix this. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Some things aren't meant to be fixed, Vicky. They're meant to be transformed. 1 year after Margaret Whitman's revelations changed everything, I stood at a podium overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Behind me, the first of our large-scale ocean cleanup systems was launching, a dream I had carried since graduate school, now made real through Margaret Whitman's legacy. I took a steadying breath, then addressed the crowd of reporters, scientists, and investors gathered before me. Today isn't just an environmental victory. It's proof that business and responsibility aren't opposing forces. Success isn't measured by quarterly profits alone, but by the legacy we leave for future generations. As I scanned the audience, my eyes landed on Victoria. She sat in the back row, quieter than I'd ever seen her, less polished, more human. Morgan Communications had undergone a complete transformation over the past year, but not in the way Victoria had once envisioned. After her removal as CEO, the board had made the unthinkable decision to dismantle the company. Its divisions were sold off to organizations with stronger environmental ethics. The Morgan name, once synonymous with corporate power, had taken on a new meaning. When my speech ended and the cleanup system hummed to life, Victoria approached the podium. "Nice speech," she said, her voice softer, stripped of its usual edge. Margaret Whitman would have been proud. I studied her carefully. No resentment, no defensiveness. "How are you, Vicky? Really?" She hesitated, then offered a small wry smile. "Surviving. It's different not being Victoria Morgan, CEO, but maybe that's not entirely bad." We walked along the shoreline, watching the cleanup system in action. The technology was already showing promising results in early trials. After a long silence, Victoria spoke. "You know what I realized? I spent so many years trying to be exactly what Dad wanted that I never stopped to think about what I wanted." I turned to her. "And what do you want?" She exhaled slowly, watching the waves. "I've been volunteering at a marine education center, teaching kids about ocean conservation. It's kind of amazing. seeing their faces light up when they understand something new. A genuine smile broke across my face. Margaret Whitman would have loved that. Yeah, Victoria murmured. She would have. Later that afternoon, Olivia Bennett arrived at my office with the latest reports. Margaret Whitman's companies had tripled in value, but more importantly, our environmental initiatives were making an immeasurable impact. There's something else, Olivia said, sliding an envelope onto my desk. We found this in your mother's old files. She left instructions for it to be delivered today. I unfolded the letter, my breath catching at the sight of Margaret Whitman's familiar handwriting. My dearest Alexandra, if you're reading this, a year has passed since you learned about your inheritance. I hope you've used this time wisely, and from what I arranged to have monitored, I believe you have. But there's one last thing I need you to understand. Your sister, despite everything, is still your sister. Victoria was just as much a victim of your father's rigid worldview as you were. She simply coped differently. Now that his influence is gone, she might surprise you. I've left instructions with Olivia for a separate fund, one dedicated to environmental education initiatives. If Victoria has shown any sign of change, any willingness to see the world differently, I want you to offer her the chance to manage it. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't in defeating our enemies, but in helping them become better people. Oh, Margaret Whitman. I sat back in my chair, absorbing Margaret Whitman's final lesson. Even now, she was teaching me, not about strategy or business, but about grace and wisdom. That evening, I invited Victoria over for dinner. As we sat on the back porch, the autumn air crisp around us, I told her about Margaret Whitman's letter and the education fund. You don't have to decide right away, I said carefully. But if you're serious about the marine education work... Victoria cut me off. Why would you trust me with this, after everything? I thought about Margaret Whitman's words. Because sometimes people deserve a chance to rewrite their story. Victoria swallowed hard, blinking away unexpected tears. But then, just for a split second, a flicker of something else crossed her face. Calculation. I knew that look. She wasn't done playing the game. I was awful to you for years. I helped Dad tear you down because it made me feel more secure about my own place in his world. I know, I said simply, but that's not where you have to be anymore. Over the next few months, Victoria threw herself into the work. She attacked the challenge of building education programs with the same intensity she once used for corporate takeovers. It was strange at first, working together instead of against each other. But Margaret Whitman had been right. People could change if given the chance. The final piece fell into place on what would have been Margaret Whitman's birthday. Victoria and I stood in her garden, the one I had maintained all these years. Victoria touched a rosebush gently. Margaret Whitman used to try to get me interested in gardening when we were kids. She'd talk about ecosystems and balance in nature. I never listened. I was too busy memorizing Dad's business lessons. I smiled. She never gave up hope, not for either of us. Victoria turned to me, her eyes serious. I'm sorry, Ellie, for everything. I was so focused on being Dad's daughter that I forgot how to be Margaret Whitman's too. For the first time in years, I pulled my sister into a hug. Margaret Whitman knew what she was doing, I whispered. She saved both of us, just in different ways. That night, I sat in my office reviewing the latest reports from our ocean cleanup projects. On my wall hung 2 photos, one of Margaret Whitman in her garden, kneeling in the dirt, teaching me about nature, and a new one of Victoria, teaching a group of children about marine conservation. her face alight with genuine joy. Margaret Whitman's legacy wasn't just about money or companies. It was about transformation of the environment, our family, and ourselves. She had played the longest game of all, ensuring not just financial success, but the possibility of healing and growth. My phone buzzed, a text from Victoria. Kids asked about adding a hands-on marine biology program. Thought you might want to help design it. I smiled, thinking about Margaret Whitman's final letter. "Count me in," I replied, because sometimes the best kind of victory isn't about winning or losing. It's about changing the game entirely. Margaret Whitman had understood that all along, and now, finally, so did we.